Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Tea, Coffee, and Torah. This is episode 22. I am enjoying these discussions. I'm enjoying the research, and I'm enjoying especially your comments and your feedback. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your support, for your likes, your shares, and also your comments. I really, I think, appreciate that more than anything else. It really makes, the research and the time that I put into this totally worthwhile. Because I'm not doing this just for me. I am actually doing this for me because I do learn. I do gain more information every time I relook at something, every time, some things I may not have studied in a few years. So when I go back to it and I look at it again, I definitely learn again. But, I can do that on my own. So I really appreciate you guys' input, your feedback. And if there's some topic you'd like to see covered, let me know. We can certainly do that. Before I delve into today's topic, I do want to just read an excerpt from my forthcoming book, Does Jesus Exist? It's going to be kind of short this morning. And this should hopefully be out within the next maybe week and a half. But this is the excerpt. Bribes and cronyism are America's new norm. Don't question me, I'm above the law. No code exists to resist the oppression of which they insist. Collective individuals now define right from wrong. Collectivism has become a source of our misery. Americans work 2 to 3 jobs to make ends meet, while all too often neglecting or selecting their basic necessities. Debt is how we survive this endless cycle of slavery that benefits our corporate lords, who enjoy more rights than individuals like you and me. They exploit this rotten system of ours to obtain through league what the individual could never achieve. Americans are beginning to own nothing, and we are not happy. They divide us, wanting citizens to become enemies, while their distraction allows too big to fail to run the state. We deny the means that could resist it, so we fight for endless sleep. To reject the law is to elevate the wicked. To obey the law is to fight them. That's Proverbs 28, verse 4. So we're going to continue reading in the excerpts from my forthcoming book. But today I wanted to return to Shiloh and just kind of finish the discussion of Shiloh. We have seen that Samuel's lineage, that he comes from the house of Korath, which was a son of Levi, and that he is indeed a Levite. Now, I want to bring this very distinction because there is one right that the sons of Aaron had that the house of Korath and no other house had in Israel. And that is the right to burn incense. And we do find indeed that throughout the story of Samuel, throughout the story of Obed-Edom, or any of the other Levites that would have served in the tabernacle or later temple, none of them are recorded as burning incense. They may have offered sacrifices, which were indeed a right of the priesthood, but they could not burn the incense. And that is something that we find that Samuel never did. So this is something else that is in line with the biblical text. Now, before we finish talking about Shiloh, there is controversy regarding Shiloh because, number one, there's never any direct instruction that Yahweh says, set up the tabernacle at Shiloh. That information is missing. It may have been housed there at Shiloh before it was destroyed, so those records could actually have been we could have lost them when the Philistines came in and destroyed Shiloh. They also could have, because it was in the Ephraim's territory, it could also have been destroyed either by Jeroboam or one of its kings, or by Assyria when Assyria later came in and conquered the land. So there's 3 different specific times during which records housed at Shiloh could have been lost. So do keep that in mind. Scripture, what we have today is what remains after hundreds of years of history. And we're not always privy to all the original sources. We're not always privy to the records that have perished during eras of destruction. Now, one of the reasons that Shiloh does come into an issue is simply because the Samaritan Pentateuch has alternate sources and alternate theories and statements regarding where the tabernacle should be located. But I want to look at Deuteronomy and some things that Deuteronomy says. And we're going to be looking at synonyms for the meanings of words, because it's not always, sometimes we'll say something and we don't always use the exact words, but they have the same meaning. So if you look at Deuteronomy 12 verse 9, it says, "For you are not yet come into the rest and into the inheritance which Yahweh your God has given you." Now, the word for rest right there is menucha, and the word menucha means rest, relaxation, a state of peace. Now, it's very interesting that the word Shiloh, the town which the tabernacle is actually set up in, also means tranquility, peace. So these have very similar meanings. So one theory is that Joshua 18 verse 1, when Joshua sets up the tabernacle in Shiloh, this is a fulfillment of Deuteronomy's earlier promise, of Deuteronomy's earlier statement of what Yahweh would do. And the fact that Shiloh builds off of the same concept in Deuteronomy 12:9 could be seen as the fulfillment of it. Now, I also want to look at the chronology. As I've mentioned so many times before, I am not a fan of rabbinic chronology. I find that the records in Talmudic sources, and even in Jerusalem sources, I find that they're very convoluted, contradictory, and they often contradict what we know in history from Assyrian records, from Babylonian records, from Egyptian records. But I've got to give credit where credit is due. And in Zevakim 118b, which is from the Babylonian Talmud, it states that the tabernacle at Shiloh existed there for 369 years. And I did talk about this last time. This is a very accurate description of what probably happened. Let me grab a swig. My throat is a little dry this morning. It is very dry out. It's a gorgeous day, but very dry. So, as I understand the chronology of ancient Israel, and specifically the Judges era, the Exodus would have happened around 1550 BCE. They would have come into the land around 1508. And then we find probably somewhere around that time, Joshua and Israel makes their way all the way to Shechem, where they renew the covenant. They put up stones, they plaster them, and they put the covenant there. And you find that for a while, Shechem serves as this makeshift capital while Israel is securing the land, while they are conquering different territories. And this occurs for a number of years. Those number of years are either A, lost to us today because the records have been destroyed in one of the conflicts that I've mentioned just a minute ago, or maybe they were never written down. We don't know. But what we do know is that by about, and I didn't write this actually in my notes, but by around 1498, somewhere around in there, the tabernacle is indeed established at Shiloh. And it serves there for 369 years. Now, my dates for the destruction of Shiloh are a little bit different than what is currently accepted in archaeology. The destruction of Shiloh in archaeology is accepted at 1050 BCE. I actually have it a little bit earlier in 1128. That would have been when they would have taken the Ark of the Covenant, and they would have paraded it before their enemies as kind of this talisman for good luck, using the article as a good luck charm with Israel's enemies. Something that was not have been sanctioned by Scripture, by the way. But you find that this chronology is very, very much in line with what we find. And I just want to say, too, where my chronology does differ, it's really hard to tell in chronology. There's one theory where they see this divide, this gap. You go from Iron Age 1 to Iron Age 2, and there's a very strong transition. But that transition is not always the same for every single site. Some site could be 30 years later, some site could be 30 years before. So it's not always, this hard date in the sand. And that is why I still support 1128 or somewhere around in there for the destruction of Shiloh. And this again would have been when the high places would have then replaced a centralized place of worship. Now, there's something else that I find that is interesting. There's a contrast in the text. In Deuteronomy 12, verse 8, the instruction is given that you shall not do all the things that we do here this day, every man who does what is right in his sight. That was something that was seen as not the best way to do it. You actually were supposed to have A, followed the written Torah, and then B, when you had questions, you were to seek to the priest, the sanctified priest, as to how to apply those precepts, statutes, those judgments to everyday life or when conflicts arose. And then we find the contrast with this is going to be in Judges 17:6, where it says, in those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that was what was right in his own eyes. And this is seen as something that is negative, something that did not provide the peace and the unity. And it wasn't just the peace and the unity that Israel lacked. It was actually the military prowess to defend themselves. Now, in the Judges account, Israel cannot defend themselves because during the times of idolatry, they become weak and God does not grant them success. Whereas during times when they follow the statutes, judgments, commands, the covenant that Yahweh gave them, you find that they do have military prowess. They are able to have autonomy. They are able to establish their own self-rule within Israel. But there's always this teeter-totter between times of oppression and then times of independence during the Judges period. Now, we're going to get into this a little bit more. I wanted to kind of come back around and just finish up the Shiloh chronology, as well as Samuel's role in that, and clarify that Samuel never does burn incense, a right solely reserved to the high priest and to his descendants. Now, next time on Friday, what I want to get into are some of the cultic distinctions that we find in the written Torah and what we know among ancient nations in the Iron Age. And I'm going to say in the early Iron Age, late Bronze Age, early Iron Age. We're going to be comparing this to the Hittites. We're going to be comparing this to the laws of Hetzor that would have existed before Israel came into the land. And I think the question that I know I'm going to seek in this study is, how do we interpret it? What of these, was there some outside influence? How do we just understand what would have existed before the official giving of Torah at Mount Sinai? And what about the world's understanding of a God? Were they totally without any understanding of a God, of a creator? Was everything that existed before Mount Sinai, was it all profane? Was it all lies and falsehood and deception? Or did some truth exist before Mount Sinai? And then, of course, the other question comes, how do we separate those? How do we separate what truth may have existed before Mount Sinai? And how does that compare with the laws, statutes, judgments, and commands that were given in the covenant and the law of Moses? So all of those are going to be ideas we're going to discuss next time, and I hope you'll join me. Please leave your comments below. I would love your feedback. If there's something that you would like to have me cover, I don't mind doing the research if it's something that I don't know. And I appreciate all of your support, and thank you so much. I hope you have a fantastic day. Shalom.